Very corporate.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jay Devine, Associate Dean in Carnegie Mellon's Dietrich College of Humanities and Social Sciences, and more to the point for today's event, advisor for Carnegie Mellon's pre-law program. I do have two brief announcements. First, due to a death in the family, Rebecca Haywood is unable to be with us today. However, to fill in for her, we have Sue Sung, who is an assistant U.S. attorney and chief of the criminal division for the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Western District of Pennsylvania. A warm welcome, Sue. Second, for those attorneys who've registered for this event for CLE credit, please be sure that you've signed in at the table marked for this purpose outside the room's entrance, and that you pick up and before you leave, place your completed evaluation form on the same table. Today's event has come together through the efforts and support of several offices and individuals, and I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge them. Many thanks to my friends and colleagues in the Dietrich College Development Office, the Dietrich College Communications Office, and the Dietrich College Dean's Office. Thank you all once again. Today's event is the 12th annual Thomas M. Kerr Jr. Lecture on Law and American Society. I want to acknowledge our continuing gratitude to the Kerr family for allowing us to have Professor Kerr's name and legacy associated with this annual lecture. As you'll see from the biography of Professor Kerr in your program, his was a very full and impactful life, and particularly in areas of service to country, to community, to his profession, and to his university. And now to our special guests for today's event. We've assembled a panel of distinguished attorneys, all of whom are women, and who are thus uniquely able to address today's topic, women and the law. Your program offers some details about each panelist's career and current position, so I won't recite these in this introduction. I'll just offer the basics. We have Erica Baird, who is a CMU alum, we're proud to say, and before retirement was partner and deputy general counsel for PricewaterhouseCoopers. We have Beth Barron, who is acting general counsel and corporate secretary for Dick's Corporate Goods. We have Mary Jo Dively, who's vice president and general counsel and secretary of the corporation for Carnegie Mellon University. We have Beth Byers-Kachowski, who is partner in charge at Jones Day in Pittsburgh. We have Marcy McGovern, senior corporate counsel for Giant Eagle. Sue Sung, who I mentioned earlier, who is assistant U.S. attorney and chief of the criminal division for the Western District of Pennsylvania. Plus, as an additional special guest, and the only male representative on this panel.
What am I doing here?
Anything you want.
You'll find out eventually, David. David Coulter, who's chair of the Carnegie Mellon University Board of Trustees, and we are also proud to say, a two-time Carnegie Mellon graduate. Needless to say, we're delighted that this group has accepted our invitation to join us today and to share with us their thoughts and experiences on this very timely and relevant topic. The American Bar Association reports that women have become and continue to become a steadily increasing portion of the American legal profession. In 2010, fewer than 1/3 of all U.S. lawyers, 31%, were women. 12 years later, in 2022, that number was 38%. The long-term trend is easier to see when viewed over the course of decades. From 1950 to 1970, only 3% of all U.S. lawyers were women. The percentage increased to 8% in 1980, 20% in 1991, 29% in 2000, and again, 38% in 2022. The trend is also apparent at American law schools. The number of male students has declined every year for the past 11 years. Meanwhile, the number of female law school students has increased every year for the past 5 years. Women now significantly outnumber men in U.S. law schools, and the gap is widening. So why is this happening? What has the journey been like for women who have been part of this trend? What are the larger implications for the American legal profession as women continue to dominate the entrance to the profession and become an increasingly large proportion of its professional ranks. Here to address these and other questions is our distinguished panel, to whom I now turn, to be led by Erica Baird.
Thank you. So, thank you everybody for joining us, and thank you Dean Devine for inviting us. We're all pretty excited to be here in honor of the late great Kerr. Before I started, I think I wanted to comment on our attire. I think we want to show you what my mic. Got it. I think we wanted to show you what the Supreme Court will look like by the time you guys get there. As Dean Devine mentioned, today's program is not so much about the law as it is about lawyers, and particularly women lawyers, and what it takes to be successful in this profession. All of the women up here have forged successful careers in the law and have a lot of experience and wisdom to share. But I also want to note our one brave man, my Carnegie Mellon classmate, who has agreed or accepted our invitation to participate. And the reason we invited him is because for all of us, men were a critical part of our success. As role models, as mentors, as teachers, as colleagues, as clients. And so David, who's really here, is a representative of all those fabulous men that we know, to share his experience and his perspectives on women in the law. So with that, let's turn to what we're here to talk about, and that is how to build a successful career as a lawyer and as a woman. There are, of course, many things that are foundational. There's hard work, there's quality work that are foundations for any profession that you may enter. There's good judgment, there's ethics. All of those you can't do without. But today we decided we wanted to talk more about the soft stuff. What is it that people don't talk about as much, but are almost equally important if you want to be successful in the practice of law? So we're going to talk about four things, or mainly four things. First, how do you find the work that you love, the place to do that work, and the culture and the purpose of that place that makes you feel at home? How do you find the platform that makes you successful? Second, the importance of confidence and resilience, with which you cannot do without. Thirdly, mentors. It takes a village. None of us could have done it all on our own. And finally, a topic that I know is a big topic on this campus, leadership. What does that mean in the practice of law? How do you get it? How do you get the experience to get it? Why is it so important in building success? But before we get to all of that, the question I wanted to ask first is, we all worked hard, we all sweat a lot, we all made some pretty big sacrifices in terms of balancing our lives as we went through the journey. So my first question, I'm going to ask you, Becky, is, was it worth it? And the second question, while you're answering that one, is what surprises you about, or surprises you now about being a woman in the legal profession? Is there something that today that surprises you that you didn't know way back when you started out?
Sure. Thanks, Erica. I appreciate it. The short answer to your first question is yes. But just to introduce myself a little bit more, I'm Becky Kachowski. I am the partner in charge and head of litigation at Jones Day's office in Pittsburgh. And for those of you who might not be familiar with Jones Day, we are a global law firm. We've got about 2,400 lawyers across the world. We are one of the 10 largest law firms based in the U.S. And right here in Pittsburgh, we've got about 80 lawyers practicing in Pittsburgh now. So that means I'm in private practice. My practice is as a litigator. I'm a trial lawyer. I focus on complex commercial work. I do business and tort litigation, class action defense work, multi-jurisdictional disputes, insurance recovery work as well. And so when I think about what it is that I love about practicing law, I'll say it like this. In the cases that we have the opportunity to handle for our clients, there's no easy answer. There's no playbook. And the issues really are very high stakes for our clients. And in some instances, the cases are existential for our clients. They're bet the company. The companies won't exist anymore, depending on what the outcome of that litigation might be. So the work is really substantive, and it's something that matters a lot to the clients that we have the opportunity to serve. And so what we are tasked to do then is develop a solution to a legal issue in that context. And so the process of doing that takes putting together a lot of different things: your knowledge of the law, the facts, the options, the client's objectives, and other types of facts and circumstances that you're pulling all together to make the right decisions. You work with your team, you work with your client, you're developing that strategy under those circumstances and putting it all together. So that analytical process is something that's incredibly mentally stimulating, and also something that is very rewarding for me in my practice. And then what really, really keeps me motivated is seeing it all come together and developing that winning strategy with and for your client, and then delivering on it and getting that outcome that allows them to be able to continue on with their objectives without the legal issue standing in the way. And as a litigator, as a trial lawyer, there is nothing like a win on a dispositive motion or a trial. And so that is something that is just continues to keep me moving and motivate me very, very greatly. It helps that it pays well. It's brought a lot of good stability to my family as part of my career and profession, and a lot of meaningful career development opportunities for me as a woman and otherwise. On your second question about what surprises me the most, I think what surprises me the most, or what always surprises me, is that we're still here talking about me being a woman practicing law. I'm an attorney. I'm representing my clients. I am advocating for them zealously. That's it. But it is not unusual for me to be the only woman in a courtroom. It is not unusual for me to be the only woman on a deal or in a negotiation. I don't think about it anymore. It's not something that bothers me in the approach. It just is in some ways a fact, and it's something that shows that we have a lot of work to continue to do here when we're looking for equality and gender representation in the field.
Anybody else about whether it was worth it?
I'll jump in. My name's Sue Song, and I come at this from a public service criminal prosecution perspective. In many ways, my career is very boring. I've only ever worked for the Justice Department since law school, but I was fortunate to find that serving crime victims as a prosecutor was absolutely the right pursuit for me, and that has been, the most fulfilling aspect of my career. In terms of what we are doing that's a little different in the public sector, it's anticipating threats, it's getting ahead of threats, it's trying to prevent mass violence. I'll just tell you, I was very, very fortunate. I started my career at the Justice Department when Janet Reno was the Attorney General of the United States, the first woman Attorney General in the United States. Just as a historical aside, she was also the first state's attorney in the state of Florida. Really a remarkable inspiration. I think I would be overstating it to say she was a mentor. I didn't have as much time with her as I would have liked, but I got to, work in the same building where she graced the halls. For younger people who may not remember, she was 6'2". She was formidable. Some people thought she wrestled alligators in Florida. But she was the Attorney General. And within days after taking her oath, we just had a series of extraordinarily challenging terrorism acts. The World War II bombing, the World Trade Center 1, which was a huge international terrorism issue. She immediately had to make calls as the Attorney General of the United States with the Branch Davidian siege in Waco, and then, of course, Oklahoma City. And she inspired anyone, male, female, any attorney who had the fortune to be in her presence by making the difficult decisions with conviction. And she suffered quite a bit of criticism, but did so with humility and grace. And so I would just say that, I'm very fortunate to have had that model and an inspiration very early in my career. And as a result, I've never veered off of that sort of crime victim focused path.
So you were, excuse me, one of the really lucky ones. You found the place to do the right work with the right culture, with the right purpose very early on in your career. For others of us, we zigged and zagged a little bit. I'm looking at Marcy. We kind of, some of us were more linear than others, but ultimately we found a place where we could be successful, which has to do with loving your job and doing it in a place that you love to go every day, really. So my question is, how did you find that place? How did you find the place that was a fit, not just in terms of the work, but also in terms of culture and purpose? And what question would you ask now of a future employer that you did not know to ask when you started out? So maybe, Mary Jo, I'm going to start with you.
Start?
Yeah.
Is this on? Is it on? Oh, okay. Okay. So how does it start? Well, for me, it starts with knowing yourself, understanding what your limitations are, what your strengths are, and how do you want the arc of your life to go? I've been 3 different places in my career, and each one deliberately chosen. I started off, I'm a Midwesterner, born and reared in Kansas City. Met my husband in law school at Vanderbilt, and we interviewed all over the place, big cities, smaller cities. And we ultimately settled on Pittsburgh as the place we wanted to be because it was a mid-sized city that played larger because of its rich history. And we thought this would be a good place to build a life together. I interviewed with several firms. I ultimately chose a mid-sized firm. And the reason I did that was that I really wanted a firm that had the opportunity for a lot of client contact right out of the gates. I wasn't interested in particularly in being in a big rotational program. I just wanted to go out and work with clients because I had no experience. You know, you come out of school and you don't know anything. And you need to develop your judgment. So fortunately, that worked well. Made partner there. I was, I believe, one of 2 women at the firm at the time I joined it, and the other one shortly left. So I was the only woman there for quite a while. But a number came after me, including several that are here in the audience today and work with us here at Carnegie Mellon today. Anyway, made partner there. But as my practice grew, I noticed that I had a lot of large national and multinational clients, and I needed a multinational firm of the size of yours to really support those clients. And so even though I loved my first firm, I moved to a much larger firm, a huge firm actually, as a partner. And it was great. I loved it. Would have never left really. But the one really great thing was that it helped me to grow in stature and put me on Carnegie Mellon University's radar. I don't know that that would have happened to me had I been at the smaller firm. And so when they decided that they would engage their first ever general counsel, they contacted me, and I was lucky enough to get the job. And I mean, it is the dream job. I mean, every day I work with the smartest people in the world and help them do the work that matters most in the world right now. And so for me, 20 years of a life combining a mission with the excellent legal work and working with all these amazing people, it's definitely been worth it, Erica. And it is the most exciting job. And my 3 kids also went here too. So that's been an added bonus.
Marcy, let me turn it to you because you're Ziggy and Zaggy.
All right. So I'm an elder millennial, which means I zig and zag, right? And that's I'm teasing about that a bit. So I will say I did an externship in law school, and that was rotational. I went to law school at Penn State Dickinson, and so I had exposure to trust and estates. I had exposure to litigation. I had exposure to labor and employment. And I realized I loved labor and employment law, and I particularly loved management side labor and employment law. So I'll pick up then the story as to like when I was here in Pittsburgh. In Pittsburgh, I worked for a law firm named Littler. Now, at the time, it was Littler Mendelsohn. It's one of the largest labor and employment law firms in the world. Literally over like 3,000 attorneys just in the U.S. alone, and then global presence. While I was there, and prior to that, though, I was at a more regional firm in Harrisburg. I had a lot of client contact, as you mentioned. When I went to Littler, I started working on large-scale class and collective actions, which really what that means is you're doing lots of e-discovery work, looking at wage and hour time data, while you're also trying to balance like some amount of client contact to keep those skills honed, and perhaps handling single plaintiff litigation as well. I didn't like it one lick. Right? Like I didn't like it. So I went to our office managing shareholder at the time, i.e. someone who would be like Becky. And I said, look, I think I need to resign. And my husband said, wait, you just did that and we're getting married in a month? Like, what are you talking about? And I said, no, I want to be honest with them. Like, I'm going to look to go in-house because this isn't for me. Like, litigation is just not for me. And they said, wait, we'd love to try and keep you at Littler. Have you ever considered knowledge management? And I said, what the heck is knowledge management? They said, it's an internal group that supports the think tank work for this law firm. So they help write the articles, they help stay out ahead of the curve on different things. And at the time, they were helping to look at the building of how do we handle the practice of law in a more effective and efficient way for our clients, drilling down on data and those types of things. And so I'm a relatively junior attorney. I get put on this project with a bunch of board members from the firm, and we start building Littler Case Smart for single plaintiff litigation, which really meant we were like road mapping, right? Process mapping, how you handle a piece of single plaintiff litigation. So every time we would talk about, well, how could we staff this? Some of the dialogue that occurred was some of your best talent is actually exiting the workforce, i.e. women, 4 to 6 years into their career on average because families are starting. And if they're looking at balance and they can't, and at the time the pandemic had not happened, right? So this was like 2013, 2014. And at the time it was, okay, we could tap into this talent if we can allow them to work from home and work on a more part-time basis. And then how do you apply technology to gather the data? So lo and behold, I kept leaning into more and more work on this project. And then they turned to me and said, do you want to lead it? And I said, okay. Having never really led anything up to that point, and I was a terrible leader, and we can get to leadership, but I had no emotional intelligence. I thought if I told you that we were going to train this way to capture the data, you would just do it. It was a big learning curve for me leading there. And so I share that because I was traveling a lot to build this project. It was really humbling. But at the same time, my family was adding a third, right? We were going to have our son. And I didn't want to travel around the country any longer. And so serendipitous that the Pittsburgh Pirates were looking for someone to come run their HR team. And I threw my hat in that ring. And then I went and did that for a little while. It was great. It was demanding. And professional sports staffs very leanly. I still loved labor and employment, and serendipity being what it is. Opening day of April 2021, I said, you know what? I think I want to go in-house in a role for a larger company where I'm just doing labor and employment work. And Giant Eagle happened to be looking. Like literally my predecessor was there for 21 years. So as my resume went to them, it was just good timing. And sometimes things like that work out. So I'm a big believer in grit, roll up your sleeves, do the work well, be honest, to Mary Jo's point, around what you want and who you are and where you are in your life at that point in time. And hopefully things will work out.
So David. So you've been a CEO, you've been, a leader. Let's assume you were out there looking for another leadership job. What question would you ask about the culture of the organization that you didn't know when we were young to ask, but now that we're old, you know?
Yeah, I will tell you the answer, and then I'll tell you why. I asked this after I got out of running a couple of companies. I moved to the private equity business. And it's global, and we travel around and we look at companies to potentially invest in, and management always does a great job of doing a dog and pony show, and then you get together with a group of employees, and one of my typical questions is, when you all are standing around the barbecue having a beer during the summer, and one of your friends asks you, what's it like to work at XYZ? What do you tell them? What's the phrase you use? And it's kind of telling what people say. And you find out whether they have a really real culture, or it's like, well, I do this job and it's okay, but I want to do something else. One of my biggest learnings in running a big company, as you can imagine, coming from Carnegie Mellon, I was very linear, as Erica would say. I mean, very analytical. And as I moved up in jobs, I just thought, I'll demonstrate how hard I work. I'll demonstrate how detailed the analysis is, and people will recognize it. But when I actually got to run a big company, I happened to have somebody that had been my corporate human resources manager running the corporate side of Bank of America. And she was so interested in culture and so opinionated that she really couldn't get along with anybody else in HR. And so she came on board, and we started to think about culture. And I found that we could do a lot of strategy things. We could do really detailed analysis of competitors. But the key was, how much time do you have to work on getting a culture you want? And you're going to have a culture in a big company, whether you work on it or not. So why not work on the culture you want? And I found, no exaggeration, I spent a big part of every day on the culture. Here's where we're going. Here's where we're trying to end up. People don't believe you initially because it seems like such a big objective, but you begin to lay out the steps. And then you say, remember when I said we were going to do X, and here's the first step we took, and you just keep repeating it and repeating it. And it begins, you feel stupid standing in front of groups of people and saying the same thing for 500 times or 1,000 times, but it begins to be a drumbeat of, here's what we're doing, here's why we're doing it, and here's what we believe in, and here's how we interact with each other, and here's how we jump across boundaries. And finally, some people say, hey, I get the music from that drumbeat, and others say, I can't stand that goddamn drumbeat, and it's okay if they leave. But this culture issue, I think, it's really hard to explore, but you should think about that when you're looking at places to go. And you ask them, how do people get promoted, or how can people move around, or what's good performance or not good performance, and definitely drill down and meet some of the colleagues you'll be working with. And if they don't talk about culture, for me, that's a blinking yellow light. So I'd think hard about that.
And I'll jump in here. I'm Beth Barron with Dick's Sporting Goods. So an advantage that I think all of you have as you go into the marketplace for jobs that maybe we didn't have when we were starting out is just how much information about your prospective employers is out there. So, and within the legal industry, there's something called above the law. And so there's just a place for anonymous reviews. And certainly you have to sort through the noise and potential bots and everything else that comes with social media and this kind of mass data. But you can drill down and start to get a sense of the culture through the democratized information. And we really didn't have access to that. And I think had to do a lot of networking to try to get a true sense of what the culture was like versus being able to just get that in an interview. And then a question I would have asked that I didn't ask at the beginning was the person who was about to hire me, what will you do when I make a mistake? So how will you treat me? Will you help me learn from it? Because I think a lot can be revealed from their management style and the culture that they're leading about whether or not there's room to make mistakes and grow from that. And if they hesitate or are surprised by that, I would dig into that a little bit, because all of us need permission to make mistakes and to learn from it, because especially as you're starting out, that's really where growth comes from.
Another thing I'd add to that, and you also have a book to read about Dick's, so it tells you a little bit about the culture. But I was my last show up every day job was one of the managing partners at Warburg Pincus, an old private equity firm that is global. And one of the things that really attracted me there, it's organized by industry and geographic areas, but all partners shared in all deals. So whether the people in Asia did something good, I got a piece of that. Or if they did something bad, I got a piece of that. And it really influenced. Now, this was a private equity firm, and it was about 500 or 700 people. But it really made people jump across boundaries without worrying about, am I going to get paid for this? And so sometimes understanding what those structures look like is helpful.
Well, what Beth was saying really does lead into what I want to talk about next, and that is confidence, and resilience. So everybody knows that confidence and resilience are axiomatic characteristics of successful people. They are characteristics that are particularly important for lawyers because, as Becky would tell you, you lose a lot and you got to come back from it and you got to learn from it. And how would you ever expect a client to have confidence in your advice if you don't have confidence in yourself? It just doesn't work. It's just it's a non-starter. But for women, there's a barrier. And the barrier is something that I don't particularly love the name of this, but it's called the imposter syndrome. And I don't know how many women in this room have experienced that. We'll get into the panel for a second. But the imposter syndrome, which affects women more than men, is this notion that you are not as smart as people think that you are. You got here because you're lucky. You really don't know what you're doing. So you can't risk failure. And because you can't risk failure, you don't volunteer for the challenging stuff that you may not have figured out yet, or you may not know how to do. And you don't ask for the raise because they may say no, and then they're going to think less of you. And then where will you be? So it gets in the way of building that confidence that is so necessary, especially as a lawyer, to be a successful, trusted advisor to your clients, because that's really what we all are. So my question to you guys is twofold. One, how do you build confidence in the women that work with and for you? What do you do to build confidence? And secondly, have you ever experienced the imposter syndrome? And if so, how'd you get yourself over it? Let's start with you.
Starting with me? All right. So look, I think it's really important to stop and emphasize that resiliency is just absolutely critical if you want to practice law. The reality is that lawyers are tasked with having tough conversations with your clients, with others. You are asked to solve intractable problems. You are asked to stand up in front of a court and have every position that you've developed be tested with questions about the facts, the law. That's what you do, and you don't always win. And the wins are great, and we talk about the wins, but you are going to face, if you're a litigator in particular, but this is true, I think, across areas of practice, you're going to face circumstances where you're not able to be successful and you can't convince a court to do what you want them to do, or your opposing counsel is being totally unreasonable in engagement with you, or whatever else the issue might be that you're facing. But those challenges are there, and you have to figure out how to embrace them and work through them and look going forward. And so for me, I used to regularly say to myself, when is everyone going to wake up and figure out I'm not smart enough to work here? And this is after coming, I was not a CMU grad, but I did well in school, both undergrad and law school. And you get into this practice, and the people that I'm working with are really very brilliant. But I had a very good mentor. I've had a lot of very good mentors along the way, and I'm excited to talk about that piece too. But he told me after one particularly challenging day in court, where we had faced a lot of questioning, that you just can't second guess yourself. When you walk out of the courtroom, you walked into that courtroom prepared with your arguments, your facts, your law. You were thoroughly prepared, and we had a strategy that we had worked out with the client. And it doesn't always go the way that you're expecting it to go. But you can't think about what else you could have said, and you can't think about what other answers you might have given. You have to think about it on the go forward. So where are we now? What happened today? And what are we going to do next? So when you talk about building resiliency in your team, that's what we do. We are always strategizing what the next move is. It's what is, again, goes back to my point about what is so engaging about the practice of law. But to me, that's also how you build resilience. And when you have a bad day, you communicate about it. And that engagement with your team, what we do is very team oriented, and you get a lot of comfort in that. And so I think that's it. I mean, that's how you build it, is you communicate and you grow.
So let me ask you this. You've prosecuted some pretty emotional cases, and you could win, but you can also lose, right? And when you lose, it's big time losing, not just it's people's lives that are at issue. Talk about resilience in the work that you do.
That's a great question, and most of my early career was spent with child sexual exploitation cases, and talk about the stakes being high. If we lose the case, the child may go back to the abusing parent or caregiver. So it's a lot of pressure, and we have an adversarial system. But one of the philosophies that we have to bring to the work with crime victims is procedural justice. It's not unique to criminal justice, but I think it's a very effective philosophy, which is that we can't assure an outcome. There are going to be adverse outcomes for victims and for law enforcement in general. But what we can try to control is how the process impacts the person, and how clearly we communicate to the victim about what could happen, about how we engage them in the process and assure that they have a voice and can testify at every stage of the proceedings, that they are safe, that they can communicate to the court exactly what their perspective is and exactly what they saw and heard. And at the end of the day, a jury will decide or a judge will decide what the outcome of that proceeding is. But assuring that we are process focused and focused so much on giving victims a voice, which you would be surprised to know is not always the case in the law. We do have a Crime Victims Act, but there's a lot of uneven application of that to crime victims across states and across systems. But I do very much keep that in mind, because if we lose, hopefully they will take from it that they were listened to, that they were respected, that their privacy was respected, that they were treated with dignity, and that they were heard in terms of how we pursued an outcome that was in the interest of justice. And so even if it's an adverse outcome, they can, feel that there was something of value through the process.
Erica, I think it's also the case that when we experience imposter syndrome, we are comparing ourselves against an ideal that's out there. I remember, and I'll tell you, my husband helped me with this greatly, because I was going through one of those angsty moments, probably sometime in my 30s. And I said, I just don't know if I don't know if I'm qualified for this. And he looked at me, he said, Mary Jo, he said, name one person who can do this better than you can right now who's available. And I really couldn't come up with anybody. And it was an interesting experience for me to think about, I'm the right person for this. I may not be the very best that ever was, but I'm going to be damn good at it, and I'm going to give it my best, and I'm not going to measure myself against the ideal who's not out there.
I as board chair, I regard Mary Jo as my counsel, and I can assure you she is well over the imposter syndrome.
I thought you were going to say she's not ideal. Fair enough. Confidence then leads me to mentorship. And I think we've all had up here mentors. It doesn't matter if they're men or they're women. They are generally people that took the time to think about you and what they could do or say to make you better. Now, some mentors are very supportive. Others deliver a lot of tough love. What I really want to talk about is a story or a description of a mentor that made a difference in your career, good or bad. There's some good things and some bad things, but talk about the importance of mentorship, both in what you received and what you give to the people that work with you. And David, I'm going to start with you. Did you have a mentor that made a big difference in your life, good or bad? And if so, how did you take that advice and what did you do with it?
I've had a number of mentors. I wouldn't point to any one, but along the way,
Your mic, David.
That I've had a number of mentors, and I'll point to one, but along the way, it wasn't somebody the same all along the way, but just happened to worked with people that pushed me further. I guess the mentor that probably had the biggest impact on what I do every day is I was working at Bank of America, and the CEO had an assistant who kind of processed all the substantive paper that came in and read it. You know, it might have been 100 pages and summarized it. And so you sort of felt like this was on your way to fame and stardom. You sat outside the CEO's office, had a great view of the Bay Area. And the first day, he'd gotten a forecast from the economics department of interest rates. And of course, being a Carnegie Mellon graduate, I said that this is not the forecast in term structure of interest rates. And I tried to explain that to him. And obviously I started low and went lower. He started to criticize it. And finally he said, you know, this is a half-assed argument you're making. So to get out of here. So you had to decide really from day one, were you going to fight it out with this guy? And he was an old school, hard ass. You never make a mistake. You're always on top of all the details everywhere you go. And I can't say it was that enjoyable. Every night I'd go home with a big stack of paper, and I remember my parents from Pittsburgh were visiting, and my dad walked by this little office, and he said, "Are you shorthanded at work?" And I said, "Yeah, actually, yes." But this guy taught me, when I became CEO, he taught me a lot of what it took to be a CEO in terms of attention to detail, if you organize a dinner. If we organized a dinner tonight and had 10 people around 5 tables, how do you seat everybody? There's a strategy of who you're sitting next to and all this kind of stuff, and really how much time you spend on it. So that was probably, as I said, I can't say it was wildly enjoyable, but I did know what to expect when I became CEO.
Beth?
I think it's important to remember there's a difference between a mentor and a sponsor. So as you're navigating your career, you're going to need mentors who help you navigate different critical career moments, who help you become a technical expert at your chosen field. But then there are going to be the sponsors who are actually the ones who have the power and authority to advocate for your advancement within whatever organization you're in. And it's important. Sometimes your mentor can also be your sponsor, but it's also going to be important that you know the difference between those two things and that you're cultivating relationships and asking very specifically so that you understand the sort of power dynamic and structure within your chosen field and in your chosen organization. And I think there's a partnership at a law firm is perhaps the most linear of those, where there's a lot more clarity around who decides who becomes partner. And I mean, maybe you could share a little bit of that, but for those of us who are in a more corporate setting, that advancement it's not linear. And so it's important throughout your career that you're developing relationships kind of far and wide, and also just being open to different opportunities, because it is, again, in that growth mindset and in becoming very, very good at what you do and developing some of these soft skills that we're talking about tonight. That's what's going to advance your career, because ultimately it's your own advocacy and your stewardship of your career that is, together with your mentor and your sponsor support, that is going to propel you forward.
Do you want to add about law firm mentorship?
Yeah, so I do think that the law firm track, particularly at a firm that's a bit bigger, is more standardized in terms of what your expectation can be in terms of options and career advancement. I do want to echo what Beth said, though, with regard to the sponsorship, mentorship sort of coalescing there, because both really are important along the way. And I'll give you I like I mentioned earlier, I've had just a ton of folks that have put a lot into me and helping me in my career. That was one thing that is the reason why I have stayed at Jones Day my entire career, because of the very significant culture of commitment to the junior lawyers by the senior lawyers at the firm. And I remember my first year practicing law, I had a mentor, and this was somebody who has been a mentor and sponsor to me all through my career. But we had come from court, and she said, "I have to show you something." And I thought, okay, I'm not sure where this is going. She said, I want you to know what you look like in court. So no cameras. It was, she said, I'm going to do a physical demonstration for you, because the reality is when you're in court, everybody can see you all the time, right? You've got a judge, a jury, opposing counsel. They're all watching you. You're on a bit of a stage. It is sort of a performance. And I had apparently been very obvious in my emotions in terms of what my reaction to what was going on in the courtroom. And she said, you gotta pay attention to this. You gotta be aware of it, but I want you to know what you look like. I was totally embarrassed. She was so right. And I was able to incorporate the feedback, and I was able to learn and grow from that. But had she not done that for me, that's hard feedback to give someone too. On the mentor side, it's hard to give someone some direct feedback like that. And I'm incredibly grateful. I will never forget it. But those kinds of things really are important. This is a career that you need that kind of guidance from folks along the way.
I will add to that. There was a woman that was one of my early mentors, and this is in the days when we were all little men. I mean, all the women were like little men. And we wore little floppy bow ties. And I mean, we were supposed to fade away, and we did. But this woman, and she ended up being the chief judge in New York years and years later, she let her clothes talk for her. She wore the brightest colors, those pants, she would have loved them. The greens and the reds, and she'd show up in court and make people sit up and take notice. And she said, you're a woman. You got to look like a woman. You got to act like a woman. None of this mini-me stuff. And that was huge, because once you could be a woman, be who you were, it unleashed an entire new way of practicing law and dealing with clients and seeing things in a room that the men didn't see, and being able to be your real self. It was really a huge platform for success for me. Let's get to leadership. Leadership, I know, is a huge topic on this campus because I've been told that by the dean. So I think so. But leadership is not necessarily a David capital L leadership. It's also with the small L. And it's really important to be seen as having those leadership qualities. So I want to talk to you guys about, what do you think is leadership? How do you think about it? How do you instill it? And how do you make sure that you and the people on your team have the opportunity to have experiences which will develop those skills? And David, I will ask you that too at the end. What is leadership? Marcy.
I'll lean in here because I told you all I was a terrible leader to start. So, and in that experience, they actually aligned me with an executive coach. I needed it. I had no emotional intelligence, right? So maybe you're talking about that in your classes, and the idea of like, know thyself, so that like, you know what effect you can have on other people, right? And listen a lot more than what you talk, right? So both like through that experience and then leading HR at the Pirates and working with a lot of coaches and consultants, in part, like, leadership is not all about you, yet it's all about you at the same time, right? And so that goes back to that emotional intelligence piece, being accessible to your people, making sure, to Beth's earlier point, like, we are all going to make mistakes. So how is it that we all learn and grow with one another through those mistakes, instead of any finger pointing or anything along those lines? Because quite frankly, it's just a distraction to the end goal of the organization, right? So for me, I think about leadership in terms of like, it's an evolution, because I think in order to lead as well, you're only going to have so many life experiences as you've had on the planet, right? Like, years on the planet. So like, you don't yet know what you don't fully know. And listening to others becomes really, really important. So thanks for the opportunity.
So talk about Janet Reno and the other kind of, really iconic leaders that you've worked with, and what about their leadership was so stunning to you?
Janet Reno is an excellent example for a lot of reasons. I talked about some of the hard decisions, but what I recall very distinctly is, this is the Attorney General of the United States, and we would be in discussions about crime prevention and crime prosecution, and she would ask about children 0 to 3, 0 to 3, 0 to 3. And I recall walking out of those meetings with some people that were much more experienced than I, and they were like, why is she asking about children 0 to 3? And my point in saying that is that, you know, within criminal justice in particular, she had a recognition that the experience of children 0 to 3 is going to have ripple effects and corollary impacts on people who end up in the criminal justice system much later in life. But I think it was a breadth of vision. It wasn't about winning. I think, you know, sort of conveying that, particularly in any litigation setting where it's adversarial and, you know, these are spirited contests in court. But conveying that, again, it's how you conduct yourself. You know, we represent the United States. It's not about the win. And sometimes in the most difficult situations, you know, we're not always completely aligned with victim interests. Which is the most painful aspect of a criminal prosecution, but it happens rarely, but it happens. But to talk about pulling that leadership thread through my experience within the Justice Department, we have prosecutors that we prosecute in the 25 counties in the western part of Western Pennsylvania. So any federal criminal matter in those 25 counties, we prosecute. And to me, both in how I want to model myself and what I admire most in leaders within the Justice Department are people who are not asking or assigning work that they're not willing to do themselves. And I just give as one example, we just concluded the Tree of Life synagogue shooting trial. And I started as counsel on October 27th, 2018. And that was just not something that I would ever have asked anyone else to do in my stead. And so to me, it was vitally important to see it through to fruition through the trial. And as a leader at any level of experience in your career, to recognize that you got to get in there and do the work to earn the respect of your colleagues and the people around you.
Thank you for doing that. Thank you. Mary Jo, let me ask you, what behaviors do you make sure that you demonstrate to your staff? How do you model leadership for your staff?
Half of them are here, so I guess I'm in trouble.
Which is why I'm asking you.
I guess I have to be honest. Well, you know, I think to me, I think you have to demonstrate to people what you believe of them, and they will most often meet that belief. And so if you are negative and berating, I think that's what you'll get. And if you're optimistic and if you remember that you hired them because they were indeed the best people in the world and still are, and you treat them that way, that's what they'll be. And, you know, so that's what I do. Is that what I do? It's what I do. Okay.
I mean, they say, for example, going back to our confidence thing, that if you're the boss, right, and somebody comes in and says, you know, I made a mistake, this is what I think we should do about it, and doesn't get fired for having made the mistake, you're modeling leadership, right? But
Go ahead. Well, no, I also think, I mean, typically when we have mistakes on our team, I take the blame for it. And that's the way it needs to be.
So David, the question I have for you is, if you're thinking about sitting on top of a large organization and you're trying to develop your people, because your people are your biggest asset, right? How are you, as an organization, building a company, building a culture that fosters people demonstrating leadership, willingness to make mistakes, all the things that you have to do to get there?
I think you've had a number of examples. Mary Jo talked about somebody that made a mistake and said, and because I had trusted them and they made a mistake, whereas I might have looked at every detail before. And you say, look, it's not your fault. And that really resonates. But I'm gonna go off script just a little bit, because I know you're coming to the end here. There's no perfect formula for leadership. I mean, I think you take responsibility, you try to think about the big picture, given a chance. I used to have to give presentations to the old executive committee of Bank America, and I would go in and tell them how to run the bank. I'd draw all sorts of weird graphs, and they'd look at me quizzically, but they remembered me. But I want to make one key point. I have been involved with lots of lawyers in my work. I've been deposed a lot. I've been a number of different trials. And probably the biggest one of my career was we merged two companies together. And many of the people on the panel today knows what happened. You get sued from all sorts of directions. And some thought you paid too much. Some think you paid too little. And it begins to get very personal as you get engaged in these things with multiple firms. And so we had one of these going on, and my personal attorney at the time was Ron Olson of Munger, Tolles & Olson, a LA firm. And when we started this, Ron walked into the room with Kristen Lau, a woman. And I'll tell you, after working with Kristen, I don't look at a woman attorney or a man attorney. I look for a legal consigliere. And Kristen took everybody on in a very organized, detailed. They were all very confrontational. She was very serious and got it done. And it was, you looked at her and said, this is a true legal concierge that I could work with forever. And maybe it was a good lesson for me. But today, when I deal with people, and as I said, I deal with a lot of attorneys. It's not man or woman. It's, does this person really look like they know what they're doing, and they present it in a way that's really understandable, and it's a complete package. So I want to make sure
the world was like you, David.
Don't think about the imposter syndrome in the room.
So, last question to everybody, and Mary Jo, I'll start with you, and we'll work back this way. What was the best piece of advice you ever got?
You're ready for the Carnegie Mellon job, take it.
So, the best advice I got was to assume positive intent. So when you're given feedback, and I think Becky gave a great example of this, but assume that that person cares enough about you to give you this feedback that may be hard to hear. And so assume that they're telling you not just because they care about you, but because you need to hear it to see what is potentially a blind spot in your own performance. So none of us are truly objective about how we show up in court or some of our other performance gaps. So learn from it and grow and don't fight it, because it's really a gift.
Best advice I ever got was definitely when I started, it was to be a sponge, right? And learn from all the work that you're doing and the people that you're interacting with. And then from there, I've now kind of made that into my own, like, I want to always stay curious. I want to stay curious about the other people. I want to stay curious about the law. I want to stay curious about what may or may not be next, right? Like, I want to stay curious. So
the best advice I got was just to remember that, at least in terms of criminal justice, it's about the crime victims, and never lose perspective, and always try to give them voice.
It's actually hard for me to narrow this one down, but I narrowed it down to 4 words that I actually still keep on my desk, in a frame, in a note that I got in my very first oral argument as a lawyer at Jones Day, and it's "Don't say anything else." And I want to give a little bit I want to give a little bit of context for this, because I got sent in my first argument. It was some interrogatory issue. I had 5 single-spaced pages of notes that I was going to go argue these bullet points on these interrogatories. And I went to Florida to do this argument. And the lawyer who was supervising me about 4 sentences in realized that the judge was with us and passed me this note and said, "Don't say anything else." And I took that advice. I sat down, I relented, the other side argued, and we won, and it was that easy. But what I carry forward with me is knowing and having the judgment to know when to speak, when to not speak, when to listen is something that I have taken with me in my career.
I have a feeling there are a lot of clients out there that kind of would like to give their lawyers that advice. For me, just to early on in my career, when I thought it was so important for all the lawyers in a case to like you and to want to be around you, my boss mentor said to me, "It's more important to be respected than liked," meaning stop smiling, stop, kind of wanting to be their friend, which was good advice too. So with that, Dean, I'm going to turn it over to you for questions from all of you. I want to thank everybody up here for joining me today.
But Erica, I just have to say, some idiot said something like that to me once when I was younger, because I was always so happy. And he said, you look too happy. You look, people are going to think you're a little shallow. And I said, I billed more hours than any other associate in the firm last year. You love my work, and I am happy. And thank you very much. And so be happy, okay?
I think you can be respected and happy.
I agree.
Thanks, Erica. Thanks, panel. So we're going to save some time for questions and answers. We have somebody in the back with Lisa, who has a microphone. She can find you, and we'll hear what questions you have. I can call on you.
Must be something embarrassing.
Yes.
Hi. Oh, okay. Anyways, I was wondering if you guys have any advice about work-life balance, in college, but also as you got older and as you entered your careers more, how did you find work-life balance, and do you think that was hard to find?
Yeah. I think that that's an unrealistic way to think about it, honestly. I think that you will never have balance, in my experience, between your work life and your other life. I think it's all part of your life. And as a lawyer, every day you're making priority judgments. Is this more important for me to be at my kid's school, or is this more important to me to be here or there? I think there's some big cosmic questions to some extent about when you're in a law firm, you're going to be working at night because your client is not somebody you know, and you need to be, you're billing billable time. When you're inside counsel, those are your people. They understand. They're much more forgiving, but you're still there some nights and some weeks and some days 24/7. So for me, that's personally, I think it's an unrealistic expectation to think that somehow there's some cosmic, balance in the world. But I do think you can make it work. And the way you make it work is just by being upfront about what you need when you need it.
And maybe that goes to bringing your whole self to work and finding a place that allows you to bring your whole self. So none of us can, I think, maybe what the pandemic taught us all in part is that we can't compartmentalize things the way we once did. I'm at work now and I'm at home now. So there is grace and permission that has come as a result of the pandemic, where all of a sudden we were all working in different environments, and you're in someone's living room that you never expected to be in, and you're seeing someone's dog or children. So we've all been humanized as a result of that. And so perhaps in many cultures, workplace cultures, it's given us a chance to bring our whole self and to open those communication lines about, so this is really important to me. It's really important to me that I am home by 6 on this day because my child needs XYZ. And I think you tell your team that, and people honor and respect that. It doesn't mean that there aren't those things that you may need to do after 6 to still deliver on what's expected of your job. But it does mean that I think that you can be transparent in a way that maybe earlier in many of our careers, we weren't able to be as transparent about what our needs were and about the other dimensions that made us who we are.
I think that's right. Marcy's comment about almost quitting because you didn't like the work. I think that's when the work-life balance thing will hit you. If you don't like what you're doing enough to be doing it almost all the time, find something else to do. I do this all the time. I'm on call 24/7. We have campuses all around the world. The sun never sets on Carnegie Mellon. So, I wake up in the morning and I have a bunch of emails from Qatar and other places, and it's just the way life is. I started this job when our triplet sons were 5 years old. They went all through Carnegie Mellon with me. They came to everything. it was a wonderful place for them, and they ultimately decided to go to school here and were smart enough to get in, thank God. And Richard took very good care of them at the Dietrich College. No pressure at all. But yeah, I think I enjoyed very much my life as a private practice lawyer. But when you get into something that is really feeding your soul, you never want to leave it. You just find a way to make everything else work within it.
And if I may, so I have an 8-year-old and 5-year-old twins. And I said to my son the other day, hey, are you upset that I can't come to your games sometimes, right? Like on a Tuesday night if you have a basketball game or whatever. And he's like, no, because when you're there, I'm so happy. And you and dad work it out that one of you is always there, right? So part of this is my kids are also leaning in and learning that this is a shared partnership. My husband's a shareholder at a firm downtown as well. It's a shared partnership between two lawyers and we're making it work, right? And he's like, it wouldn't be fair to you if you didn't work. I'm like, that is true. I like what I'm doing. I love what I'm doing now, right? So I think the thing to keep in mind is if it isn't for you, don't be afraid to step away from it and go find something else, right? You can still be successful if what you're trying at first isn't the exact right fit.
Yeah, and I talk a lot about this with our junior lawyers in our firm because I do think one major difference from being in school and when you're out in practice is there's not just a semester that ends and then you get a holiday break. There's not a summer that comes and you get some kind of break. It is a career and you have to find space and you have to define it for yourself. And particularly at a firm, and this is one of the things I love about it, it's a very horizontal reporting structure. So you're doing projects for different clients, you're doing projects for different lawyers. And rather than a sort of vertical reporting structure where one person knows how much you have on your plate at any given time, you're the only person that really ever knows how much you're being asked to do. So you have to be comfortable saying, I'm at max capacity. I can't do anything more. Or I need more work. I'm looking to build more. And I find some people can never get comfortable with that. And then they struggle a lot with finding the right balance and eventually may or may not be able to make it. But it is at least at a firm, it is very individualized and it does fall to you to be able to say, this is, I can't do anymore. And we respect that, but we need to hear from folks for that.
Thank you so much.
Yes.
I guess my question is at what point in your undergrad did you realize that the pre-law track was kind of the track for you and that law school was your direction? This is for anybody.
For me, I did not go directly to law school. I come from a family of lawyers and rejected the entire idea out of hand. So it was a non-starter, and actually worked in publishing for a while, came back here to work for a year. But what turned for me was a couple of things. One, I really wanted a career. I knew I wanted a career. I wanted independence. I wanted financial independence, whether I was married, whether I had kids, I didn't care. And I wanted a credential that would guarantee me that. It turned out I loved being a lawyer. But I have to say, if I'm being really honest, it wasn't because like some other members of my family that absolutely loved the law. I didn't have that. I love the law and this is my calling. And I think the one wonderful thing about a law degree is you can do so much with it. You know, we're all practicing lawyers up here, but the number of people that you think of, and whether it's in the C-suite, whether it's in government, whether that just do massive numbers of things with the skills that you get, is really something to think about. I don't know if there's any other degree that allows you to do that many different things.
So I thought about being an academic and actually went and got a master's degree before I figured out that the law was what I wanted to pursue. And I think the biggest, the difference that I saw or I perceived along the way between the two was just I felt like where I had gotten with the academic potential career was very niche. It was very focused, a lot of theory, a lot of big thinking. And the practice of law just felt so much more practical and day to day. And I was really attracted to that. So, I don't know if those are things that you're contemplating, but to me, that sort of practical application of the law and the facts and putting it all together really was something that I found attractive.
And a little bit in response to your question, but maybe not really. Doing this now, all of you, I am envious because we are about to be heading into maybe the most interesting 20-year period of legal development that you're going to see. All kinds of development as the law tries to catch up with digital technology, with social justice. Is the law on freedom of expression going to change as violently as it did in the 60s when we got what we have today, and now there's a big backlash? What's going to happen with all that? You will decide that. So it's a very exciting time to be going into the law.
Hi, my name's Amy. I was just wondering if you guys had any mentors before you went into your career, like perhaps in undergrad or like right before law school or even during law school. And if so, like how important was that? How did you find a mentor? Especially when you're like not actually like in legal studies yet. And then like subsequently, how important is it that we start preparing like during undergrad, like looking for mentors, looking for interviews and like internships, opportunities like that? Like, is this time going to impact my future?
I mean, I would just say in terms of being, don't stress yourself out about being very deliberate about it. But for me, at least, if you put yourself in environments where you are passionate about what's going on and you're very interested in the issues, you're going to find the people that will mentor and inspire you. I wasn't sure I wanted to go to law school. I ended up writing to a bunch of tribes in South Dakota, as a senior and undergrad, and ended up getting hired by the Yankton Sioux tribe in South Dakota. And so I went there and for room and board, they weren't paying me, but for room and board, and I was exposed to the tribal government. And that's where I saw just how dire the law enforcement and crime issues were on the reservation. And that's when it was the switch was flipped. And I was like, I need to go to law school. And frankly, it was the tribal council who encouraged me. They're like, we're really glad to have you here. You're really helping us a lot. But if you go to law school, you can help us a lot more. And that was it. And so I think, if you're in places where you care about the issues, you're going to find the people that will inspire you to take a particular path.
I would also say build relationships. The mentors will come from those, but I wouldn't be so formal about looking for people to mentor you. Sometimes that can be a turnoff to people. I would be more just of building a relationship, and you'll find that you'll get what you need from that.
Cocktails.
Going once? Do we have any other questions? Yes.
Hi. My name is Lee. I am the president of the Pre-Law Society at Carnegie Mellon. And we are actually starting a Woman in Law chapter through our pre-law program. So it's great that we had the chance to, and many of our members are here today. So it was great to hear from everyone today and just learn about your experience and your insights and your perspectives. I guess just one question is, what is something that you would like us to share with our female students as the main student speaker or voice? And how can we get students engaged? So female students, not necessarily who are interested in pre-law, but who are all across our campus, like engineering, CFA, CS. What can we do to better inform them that the law is there for them, and if they would like to explore this career avenue, that this is fully available to them?
Well, I just said it, which is it's the most exciting time to go into the law in 50 years. So go for it.
And sorry, Beth. One thing I would say is like having undergrad degrees that are in something other than legal studies is incredibly important, right? Like environmental attorneys need a lot of like environmental studies experience and sometimes mathematical modeling experience to even talk to the consultants about what's going on certain sites, as an example. And so like the breadth of education that's happening here at CMU, the reality is hopefully people from multiple disciplines ultimately are interested in going to law school because it adds to the value of the lawyer, really, if they have that other undergrad experience and can then apply the law to it as well.
And law school's a continuation of this intellectual playground that you're all in right now. So if you love your time here, law school might actually be easier. Believe it or not, that's a dirty little secret about law school. It might be a little bit easier than the CMU undergrad curriculum. So there's one test typically right at the very end. They don't tell you that. So you sort of study and prepare towards the end of the semester. So I think there's a lot of diverse minds that thrive in law school and then use the skills that they further develop in law school to go out and do great things. So great thinkers and big thinkers get law degrees to continue the evolution of their thinking.
And not to forget service. Obviously education's expensive and we have to make, rational decisions coming out of undergrad, but law enforcement, I work with a lot of FBI agents who have law degrees. I mean, there are many ways to serve and to confront the threats facing all of us in the world and in the United States as a servant of the public.
IP lawyers too. We've got multiple folks with us who've got PhDs in chemistry and electrical engineering and other really complicated subjects. The protection of intellectual property rights through patent law is something that's really important as well and in demand.
Yes. It's coming.
Hi, my name is Annika. I really enjoyed this talk, and one question I have is, in your undergrad years, what is like one course that you took you think helped you in your law career?
Well, I'll answer as the CMU person up here. I was the editor of the Tartan, and I would say, listen, look, you really?
I wish you still were.
I would say that probably was the most helpful. The writing discipline, the constant writing discipline was really helpful.
I would say logic.
I was going to say statistics of all things. You actually have a pretty strong correlation of people that are good at math and who then can also be good attorneys. That sort of analytical thinking is something that tends to match.
I'll tell you what I wish I would have taken, and it's accounting. Because I grew up as a deal lawyer before I came in-house, and you have to draft accounting principles in deal documents. And so it really would have helped me to have instruction on that instead of having to learn it later when I became a lawyer.
What's it called? General accepted principles of accounting.
Generally accepted accounting principles.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
There's some universities that think that should be taught as a language.
Well, we're in their neighborhood, so if you see one, I ask. Well, I think that brings us to about our close. So with that, I want to thank our audience for attending, but I want to extend special thanks to our panel and to I think this session was both enlightening and inspiring, and thank you, Erica, for pulling all of this together.
My pleasure.
Thank you, Jay.
Well deserved.